To our focus of the day, the African Development Bank Group is Africa's premier development finance institution. It comprises three distinct entities: the African Development Bank, AFDB, and the African Development Fund, and the Nigerian Trust Fund, on the ground in 41 African countries, with an external office in Japan. The bank contributes to the economic development and the social progress of its 54 regional member states. Late last month, ratings agency S&P Global affirmed its AAA-1 long-term issuer credit assessment of the African Development Bank with stable outlooks. The ratings agency positively assessed the bank's very strong financial risk profile, very strong capital adequacy, strong funding and liquidity, extraordinary shareholder support, and adequacy of its governance and management. The ratings agency noted that the bank's $115 billion capital increase approved by shareholders in October 2019 and the replenishment of the African Development Fund, the bank's concessional window in December 2019. The rating agency reports further noted that the AFDB will play a key role in supporting the region, particularly in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. The institution approved an up to $10 billion in relief package for 2020, of which $6.9 billion will be financed by the AFDB and the remainder through its concessionary lending window. The president of the bank, Akinwumi Adesina, says, and I quote, "Now, we are delighted with S&P Global decision to affirm the banks with these ratings. It reflects the bank's very strong financial position and risk management, as well as sound governance." He adds that the bank will continue to maintain these standards with strong support of all stakeholders as we deliver much needed financial knowledge and policy support to our regional member countries during and after this period of COVID-19 pandemic, end quote. Now, since his election as president in 2015, Dr. Akinwumi Adesina has led the bank to impressive giant strides. Armed with a vision for a much improved quality of life for Africans, he launched 5 priorities, high fives, for African accelerated development, which includes Light Up and Power Africa, Feed Africa, Integrate Africa, Industrialize Africa, and improve the quality of life of the people of Africa. An independent analysis by the United Nations Development Programme has shown that achieving these high fives will allow Africa to achieve 90% of the Agenda 2063 and the SDGs. I have joining me via Skype now from Lagos Island. He's the MD and co-founder of Babban Gona. His name is Kola Masha. Thank you very much for your time.
Pleasure. Glad to be here.
MD Babban Gona. Yes, now let's start with your implications, the implications of the S&P ratings for the African Development Bank. How does this come to you? What do you think are the direct implications?
Well, I think, fundamentally, the AAA rating that the African Development Bank has been able to maintain over the years has been critical to its ability to really not only raise, but deploy cost-effective capital to drive the development of the continent. So I think it's a great step to ensure that despite the challenges that the bank may have seen over the last few months, that the S&P team still views it as an exceptionally respectable and stable institution to maintain that rating.
Now, this feat of S&P ratings is unprecedented in AFDB. Do you think Africans should expect more initiatives based on the efforts of the president, Akinwumi Adesina?
Well, I think, the reality is the African Development Bank as really the preeminent development bank on the continent in a region of the world that I think most people would argue is probably requires the most development, plays an even more important role than its contemporaries, I think, in other regions. I think if you look at the initiatives that the president has put in place, he's really put development front and center. One of the things I really like about his approach is the desire for prioritization. Really, at the end of the day, when you look at all the challenges Africa faces, you could see a scenario where someone tries to boil the ocean. But I think what he's done is strategically identify the areas that have the biggest catalytic impact and to target and focus the resources of the organization and hopefully catalyze in additional financing into those sectors to create rapid change.
The world has been shaken to its roots by COVID-19 pandemic. We see what's happening globally. Do you think that this will not have any effect on the financial risk profile of the AFDB?
Well, I think the AFDB has to maintain a AAA rating really is a sign of an institution's ability to really be quite judicious in its lending decisions and making sure that it's ensuring that it doesn't put its investors' funds at risks too much, I should say. I think the reality is this is an unprecedented time for really every financial institution. I would argue that it is in these difficult times that investors like the African Development Bank actually, as opposed to stepping back, need to lean in. I think us as Babban Gona, as an example, recognizing the important role that agriculture plays in Nigeria and our role as the single largest maize producing entity in Nigeria and on track to be one of the largest on the continent, that we actually made the conscious decision to actually increase the amount of investment we're making this year by 50% to ensure that we play our role to ensure food security in these very difficult times.
Now, let's now look at various areas covered. What are the various areas covered by the High Five initiative of the AFDB in the last 5 years? It looks very strategic to me.
Oh, very much so. I think he's focused on really a couple of very key areas. I'll highlight just a couple. The issue around power, right? I think we all recognize that that power plays a significant role in really hampering the development of the industrial sector in Africa. And then he's also recognized that really at the end of the day, the role that agriculture plays in not only positioning the numerous countries in Africa to really have an industrial revolution by providing cost-effective raw materials to drive that industrial revolution, but the fact that agricultural investments, bar none, of any investment that a country can make has the biggest return on investment from a development standpoint, because not only the fact that agricultural value chains tend to be very long value chains. If you look at the poultry sector as an example, I think the example highlighting the earlier comments you made about the CBN's decision to ban the importation of maize, right? Because of the long value chain of the poultry sector creates about 14 million jobs in Nigeria, not just directly in the poultry sector, but in the value chain, in the maize value chain, in the soybean value chain, in the feed value chain, et cetera. So it's very, very catalytic to focus in on these sectors. Plus, I think we often forget that the journey that many developing countries have taken to rise into the developed status has begun with a focus on agriculture, has begun on really ensuring that they are able to dramatically increase the productivity of their farmers and ensure that they can become very strong exporters of agricultural produce. And then once they have a strategic advantage in the export, then they start to forward integrate into processing and higher value manufacturing.
Interestingly, you touched on my next question, which is on agriculture. Since 2015, 74 million Africans have benefited from agricultural technologies through the bank's efforts. That's talking of AFDB helping impact them. Now, do you think all of this would impact food security one way or the other across the continent?
Well, I think without a doubt, it played a critical role. I think the key thing, though, is as you look at some of the investments that the bank makes, it has a very strategic focus on food security. But I think a priority should be placed on investments that have those long value chains and are not just processing agricultural products that are basically imported into the continent. But a strong focus needs to be focused on supporting agricultural investments on the processing side that are sourcing domestically and sourcing locally. That I think is probably, if you look at the, at not just the bank, but I think broadly investments in agriculture across the continent have not paid as much focus on that very important part.
Sounds interesting. Now, Morocco and Egypt has benefited from the Light Up Africa area of these initiatives. That's one of the focus of the High Five agenda. Now, do you think that the bank would not be overwhelmed with the number of countries in Africa? Talking about actualizing all of this.
Well, I think it's a very fair concern, right? We do have a very large number of countries that that the bank is covering. I think once again it goes back to that need to be very strategic in how you prioritize and identify those areas where you can have really one single investment can have a massive catalytic effect on the region, and think about those the impact that you can have. Not so much on what it's going to have in one particular country, but what it's going to have in terms of the broader region, be it East Africa, Southern Africa, West Africa, North Africa, etc.
Now, in the area of industrialized Africa, the bank have facilitated the construction of the Nairobi-Addis Ababa corridor, which received $670 million in bank financing, which has enhanced the potential for trade and job growth in Ethiopia and also Kenya. Would the cost implications not be too enormous for the bank across the entire continent if it keeps executing this type of money-gulping projects? These are very, very capital-intensive projects.
Mm-hmm. But I think the key point is, the key question I think you need to ask is, are these investments required? And if they are required, who's best positioned to do them? Right? At the end of the day, what has been demonstrated time and time again is that these types of corridor investments are probably the most efficient way to deploy infrastructure capital, because it really concentrates investment and ensures that you're not just building infrastructure where there's not going to be other complementary investments that are going to be made to actually leverage that infrastructure. Right? If you look at Nigeria as an example, the Lakija corridor between Lagos and Kano is where the investments have been made in that corridor is one of the reasons why you see really a proliferation of investments by the private sector really along that corridor. So at the end of the day, these infrastructure investments are necessary. We can't progress without it. Money is scarce, so you've got to focus those investments, and the corridor strategy is the way to go. And the African Development Bank, because of its nature of its capital and its ability to take longer-term bets, is, I think, perfectly positioned to play that role compared to other financial institutions on the continent.
Indeed. Now, with the current level in which FDB has torched the lives of Africans under the leadership of Dr. Akinwumi Adesina. Now, what are the prospects of African countries if he has the opportunity to lead for another 5 years?
Well, I think fundamentally, I had the distinct pleasure of working for Dr. Adesina when he was Minister of Agriculture here in Nigeria, and I can hands down say that I have personally never met anybody as passionate and committed to the development of the African continent. And so I think we've just started to see the impact of I think his presidency on the bank, and it would be unfortunate if we were unable to see that fully culminate in a full two-term presidency.
So let's wrap it up this way. What more expectations? We've talked about the light up thing, we've talked about agriculture, we've talked about infrastructure, and a lot has already been done and is on the way. Now, what more should we look at, even post-COVID-19?
One word, my friend: execution. Right? I think he's laid the foundation, he's got the strategy, he's got the prioritization, he's raised the capital. Now we need to execute. You have to go find those deals, they need to ensure those deals are crowd in additional capital, and ensure those deals are actually executed in a manner that creates the necessary impact.
Kola Masha, thank you very much for your time. He is the MD, CEO, Babban Gona. Thank you very much for joining us on Business Nigeria.